Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar today on practical guidance on post-lockdown strategies in the construction sector. My name is Andy Desmond. I am the head of the UK business development team for the construction sector, and I'll be chairing today's session. The construction sector has been impacted by COVID, with many sites having to shut down temporarily and now reopening with social distancing measures in place. We're not able to operate in the same way that we have done previously. This leads to challenges in the new post-COVID environment, not just in compliance with strict health and safety guidelines, but also in areas such as mental health of employees, etc. We aim to discuss this and develop this throughout this webinar. Next slide, please, Rob. So our panel today is made up of three of my Marsh colleagues. Firstly, we've got Mark Sharp from Mercer Marsh Benefits, and he'll be taking you through talking about health and well-being in the construction sector. Then we have Lorna Feeney from Marsh Risk Consulting, and she'll be talking about mental health and well-being. And finally, we have Darren Holmes from Marsh Risk Consulting as well, and he'll be discussing the challenges of the new normal. Throughout this webinar, we've also got a couple of polls that will pop up on your screen, and we'd really appreciate it if you could all participate, and literally you just have to click on your answer. The webinar is scheduled to last for an hour. Our panelists will aim to conclude their discussions within 45 minutes, leaving 15 minutes for a Q&A. And I would encourage you to submit any questions that you have through the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, and these questions will be covered towards the end of today's sessions. You can type your questions into the window. If we can't answer your questions today, we'll get back to you as soon as we can with an answer. So moving on to the actual webinar now, I'll hand you straight over to Mark.
Brilliant, thanks Andy, and welcome everybody. My name is Mark Sharp. I'm principal in our workplace health consulting team in Mercer Marsh Benefits, and we work with clients, a very wide range of clients, including the construction industry, to help them identify and quantify health risks and then put solutions and strategies in place. And I guess COVID has brought health and well-being into a really sharp focus in recent months, and whilst it's always been important, it's probably never been more so than currently. So today I'm going to give, over the next few minutes, just a brief overview of what we observe and what we see from our experience and data of the construction industry around health and well-being. Spend a few moments talking a little bit about the impact of COVID itself and how that's changing things, changing the dynamic, and also then move on to just give a flavour of how certain companies and how you can think about what you do next moving forwards to become future fit. So if we just move on to the first slide there, Rob, thank you very much. So we run a survey in conjunction with Vitality and Cambridge University called Britain's Healthiest Workplace. Some of you may well have been participants in this, and we've taken a snapshot of the construction sector results from this. And you can see, and I've really only highlighted some key findings here, but it's straight away the one that stands out at the top there is mental health, in that nearly 55% of people who were surveyed experienced some sort of mental health issue in some form of relation to work. And actually, around about 1 in 16, 1 in 17 have symptoms of severe mental illness. Moving around this chart, you'll see also that financial concerns play a part here. You might think 8% is quite low, but that's around having a lot of financial concerns. We define that as having more than 3. So you're worried about debt, about savings, about your retirement plans, all of those things combined. If you were just to look at those individually, that would probably be closer to 50% as well. So financial well-being is very, very important. Sleep is very little focus really on sleep, but it's increasing more recently. You know, if you don't sleep well, you don't perform well. You are less likely to be physically active. You're more likely to eat poorly, and you are just simply not able to give your best the next day. So you know, it's quite a significant proportion of individuals there who really struggle with their sleep quality. And then you see quite naturally that we have poor nutrition, a lack of physical activity. And that's not just the government guidelines around 150 minutes per week of physical activity. That's very much around the sedentary lifestyle that is increasingly prevalent today as well. And ultimately, quite a few individuals have at least one chronic condition. And again, that's what I mean by that is a diagnosed condition that leads them to needing treatment and often time off work. So again, you can see how this pattern of these health risks start to contribute to a lack of productivity or a reduction in productivity. And you'll notice there in the blue box on the right hand side, the calculation that comes out of this survey is that nearly 35 days per employee are lost per annum as a result of health and well-being issues. That's partly around absenteeism, but also around presenteeism, which is being in the workplace but not able to fully perform, relating to the fact that you've got mental health issues or symptoms, etc. So that gives you quite a clear snapshot there. So that's 2019 data. So that's before COVID. So there was already been an underlying issue, and many of you will sort of, I reckon, recognize some of these sorts of figures in the individuals you see in your organizations. But what has COVID done? What impact has that had? So clearly there's been a disruption to how we work and the way of working, the place of work, and that has an impact on every individual. Lots of people will, to be honest, everybody will react differently to COVID and their own individual circumstances, but undoubtedly physical and mental health have been impacted. For some people, it's actually been a positive change. Working from home isn't necessarily a bad thing, and for quite a few people, they've seen they've had more time, they've lost their commute, they've actually had a little bit more time to spend at home with their family, and that's for them a good thing. But for quite a few individuals, I'd say that mental health, we've seen in the surveys and the research that have been done, mental health there's been a fairly negative impact for quite a few people. So those with an underlying anxiety or mental health symptom, it's really started to enhance that problem for them. So, you know, those companies that have done well at this stage have been really, really clear and consistent and regular and frequent in their communication, quite open in their communication on a regular basis. And over time, they've started to tailor that to the audience by knowing their employees, in so much that they will be in more regular contact with those that they feel need more support, and be directing those individuals to services such as employee assistance programs if they feel that the support they need goes beyond just a little bit of coaching in the workplace scenario. From a physical perspective, the research also backs the fact that people now working from home or working in adapted workplaces, there is a growing trend and theme of re-emerging musculoskeletal symptoms as well. So it's really important as employers that the risk assessments stay up to date and think of them as dynamic documents, because as the COVID restrictions, I guess change over time, so your risk assessments must keep up to date as well as the working environment and the working situation changes. So as I say, some companies have been better prepared than others, and some have responded better than others. But what's agreed, I think, across all companies is that now is a really important time to really take a serious look at their health and well-being and take almost really a strategic view. And I guess before I go and talk a little bit about what our company's doing now and what should we do next, I'm just going to ask a question out there for you guys as participants. If we can get that question up now, really, it's just what you as participants and representatives of your business, what's your current approach to employee well-being? Do you feel it's really, really robust and you're seeing results? And all the way through to, you do what's required. So have a look at those 5 answers there. I'll just give it 30 seconds just to let everybody tick a box. I think you're only allowed to tick one. It makes sense, only to tick one. Fantastic. So Rob, when you're ready in the next few seconds, if you want to share some results. Okay. So excellent, that's interesting. So a few of you, round about sort of a quarter there, are really feeling in a confident place around your health and well-being, which is really excellent. And some of you, another quarter, are sort of coming up sort of in that with the second option there around the strategy in place, but not quite sure if it's actually being as effective as you'd like it to be. But the majority of you there, feel that you're doing a few bits and pieces, but you probably could do more. And that's not uncommon at all. And we see that across various sectors. So I think it makes sense now for me just to move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about, generally what do we mean by sort of what are the things you can do and consider around, you know, strategy. And this is high level. So you know, we can pick up with specific questions either at the end or offline, but ultimately, really health and wellbeing needs to be considered in its broadest context. It is a fantastic mechanism for improving productivity. And the research is very, very clear. Healthy and happy employees are more engaged and more productive. So when we look at Britain's healthiest workplace and the top 5 performers, they absolutely, you see those losses in productivity are really, really reduced because they've really focused on the health and well-being of their employees. But we need to do it in the broadest sense. So it's not just physical and mental health. We've got to think about the financial well-being. It has such an impact on the mental health. But social well-being, which is, I guess the lens has really focused on that in the last few months as we've all been socially distancing, which actually ultimately is physically distancing, because we've all been still able to communicate and connect with each other just through different means. But it's really incredibly important as a business to think to yourself, how am I connecting and keeping my communication lines open with my wide and varied employees? And work for well-being is also, you know, this is not necessarily a specific health pillar in its own right, other than the fact that we need to think about the design of work and how do we make sure that we give our employees the best opportunity to be successful and bring them their best selves to work and be as productive as they possibly can. But from a strategic perspective, I think, you know, just 3 things I really want to say. Measurement is absolutely key. 3 B's here: baseline, business case, and benefits. It's really important to make sure we understand where we're starting from when we make a sort of a plan for the future. We need to have some measurement in place. That helps inform the business case, and then ultimately we can monitor and review what sort of impact we've had over time. Communication, I've mentioned a couple of times already, is incredibly important. You can design the most amazing strategy in the world, but if you don't have clear lines of communication out there on a consistent basis, it's never going to really engage your audience, and therefore they won't necessarily participate and benefit from it. And ultimately a culture as well. So the most effective health and wellbeing strategies that we see executed are very much led from the top of the organization, so sponsored at the executive level, and it filters down through recognizing that line managers are really, really crucial people and parts of representing your well-being strategy, but also sort of that link with your employees and bringing it to life. So quick summary, a whistle-stop tour there of strategic review of health and well-being, a methodical health and well-being strategy, and evidence-based interventions and programs really, really do make a difference and are shown to increase productivity. But one of the health risks I've mentioned here is mental health. And I'm going to pass on to Lorna now to do a little bit more deeper dive into that specific health risk.
Thank you very much, Mark. Hi, everybody. I'm Lorna Feeney. I work in our risk management department and head up our mental health proposition. So work-related ill health is increasing in the construction sector, according to Health and Safety Executive, and this was before COVID. However, while physical health is very much on the construction industry's radar, a real growing concern is the mental health. The same data shows stress, depression and anxiety has increased by 10% from 2016 to 2017, with 1/5 of all cases of ill health in the sector stemming from mental health issues. Consequently, over 400,000 workdays are lost each year. Absence and productivity aside, even more worryingly from the Office National Statistic figures, show that the risk of suicide among low-skilled male labourers, particularly those working in constructions, was 3 times higher than the male national average. So this means every working day, 2 construction workers take their own life. The construction industry provides a challenging and pressurised lifestyle, long hours, demanding workloads, projects which are often short-term and far from home, and redundancies such as we've seen with Carillion. Many construction workers are temporary or contractors, and the lack of job security can contribute to stress and anxiety. Added to this is the fact that there is no paid sick leave, holidays or access to company health programmes, which means it's harder for them to get the support they need to fully recover if they're suffering from mental ill health. Combine this with a predominantly male workforce, the majority of whom want to project a macho image, it's easy for mental health problems to take root and become overwhelming. So in 2017, the government commissioned Lord Stevenson and Paul Farmer, Lord Stevenson, Chief Exec of Mind, and to independently review the role employers can play to better support individuals with mental health conditions in the workplace. Whether work is causing a health issue or aggravating it, employers have a legal responsibility to help their employees. Work-related mental health issues must be assessed to measure the levels of risk to staff. Where a risk is identified, steps must be taken to remove it or reduce it as far as reasonable practicable. So the Thriving at Work report sets out a framework of actions, and I've listed the 6 core standards there. And the review has recommended employers of all sizes can and should put in place over the next 10 years. The core standards have been designed to help employees improve the mental health of their workplace and enable individuals with mental health conditions to thrive. By taking action on work-related stress, either through using the HSE management standards or equivalent approach, employers will meet parts of the core standards framework as they will form part of a mental health work plan, promote communications and open conversations by raising awareness and reducing stigma, and provide a mechanism for monitoring actions and outcomes. Although stress can lead to physical and mental health conditions and can aggravate existing conditions, the good news is that it can be tackled by taking action to remove or reduce stressors. Employers can prevent people becoming ill and avoid those with existing conditions becoming less able to control their illness. By training employees to become mental health first aiders, teaching them how to support those in need of immediate assistance until the right professional help is available, recognising the signs of mental ill health, asking the right questions, providing reassurance similar to a role of a physical first aider, you will be covering core standards 2 and 3. It's important to train line managers and supervisors as they are arguably represent the front line of wellbeing management and act as a gatekeeper to referrals of other pathways to support by training management. You are covering core standard 5. Lots of companies have gone out there and trained mental health first aiders and line managers, but lots haven't implemented a mental health strategy and created company policy documents to support the trained staff, because the trained staff also, they have a duty care of them too. Employment tribunal costs were scrapped in 2017, and as you can imagine, the number of claims soared. It has been reported that there are more delays than there used to be, as there's just not enough people to handle all the claims. If a mental health framework has been embedded into the business, it will protect your brand and reputation and hopefully your bottom line. Your evidence will prove that you've invested in employees' mental health and wellbeing and able to demonstrate it. On the Equality Act, some employees will have pre-existing physical or mental health conditions when recruited, or may develop one caused by factors that are not work-related. Their employers may have further legal requirements to make regional adjustments under the equalities legislation, but usually your HR has got tight control on this. Next slide, please. So this is a case study which happened in France, very shocking, but it's the first that I know of its kind, where some of the board members were charged, sentenced and fined with psychological harassment, resulting in 19 employees completing suicide, 12 attempted suicide and 8 suffered from depression. This actually happened in 2008, but it came to a close in 2019. So following this, on the back of this, the HSE on October 19 issued new criteria for investigating cases of work-related stress, saying it will investigate if it receives evidence that a number of staff are experiencing work-related stress or stress-related ill health. That is not an individual case. But we need to look out for the HSE may start looking into organisations either prevent emotional hazards or recognise their causes early so that effective mitigations can be put in place. Being preventative means that the applications can be found at the coping stage rather than waiting until the struggling stage when existing and more popular controls kick in. The HSE may start analysing and enforcing on organisations if they have adequate preventative measures in place. Slide 3, please. Challenges improving the workplace. So we've just gone through our legal obligations and the duty of care under the Health and Safety Working Act. Morally, it's the morally right thing to do to look after the welfare of your employees and should be embedded into your own core values, particularly in the construction trade, because it is male dominated. We do have a government initiative which is Mates in Mind, which I know a lot of businesses have taken up. Lots of accountants and financial directors love hearing that it's a great financial way for having a mental health strategy. It can have a positive effect on the bottom line, as you can read there what Soma Analytics has put. But it also can help reduce any future employment tribunal costs, therefore no court costs. It will help protect your brand and reputation, therefore open to better negotiations for attracting better talent. Retaining staff so you don't have to use money to advertise, to employ, or for more staff to train. By training line managers and educating staff on self-awareness, this will help reduce accidents and near misses too, as they're able to spot the signs of someone struggling earlier. This will then impact on insurance premiums for employment liabilities and motor insurance. Thames Water advised that after they implemented a mental health policy, that they reduced their accidents and near misses by 50%, which was a great saving on their insurance premiums. And for business side of it, lots of tenders are asking businesses now to detail their mental health plan, and not just about employed, but also about your subcontractors too. This may be the deal breaker of whether they place a business with you or not. So next slide, please. So why address mental health in the workplace? So I've gone through quite a lot of that on just a few moments ago, but being able to find out by routinely monitoring the well-being of the workforce will give a greater insight into being able to treat the cause instead of the symptoms. You can only do that if you create an open culture. If people are ringing in sick, masking their illness, saying they have headaches or stomach aches, you're not getting to the bottom of the problem if it is to do with anxiety or depression. And then you'll be able to speak to them, and be able to have a look at reducing hours and work out what's the best plan for them. So it's really, really important that you open that culture so you have people who are able to tell you exactly what's happening. So how do we do this? Reduce the risk. Next slide, please. So businesses can do this any way around they like. In my experience, they tend to train first and then wrap around a strategy. It has to be a full involvement of the whole of the business, from leadership right down to the ground roots. But all of these here will help out strengthen and have a mental health strategy in place. Now I'm going to pass you over to, sorry, I've got our services, what we offer, which is the next slide. But happy to answer any questions at the end of it or offline. Now I'd like to pass you over to Darren Holmes, Head of Operating Risk Consulting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna, and thank you everyone for joining. My name is Darren Holmes. I'm Head of Operational Risk Consulting. We focus on the risk areas that directly sort of impact insurance, and I just wanted to talk through some of the learnings that we've seen through COVID-19, and particularly in relation to the construction sector. So sort of returning to the new normal, I think that actually the construction sector faces some big challenges moving forward. I think just looking back at some of the statistics, if we look back over 18-19 and we look at the impact of health and safety, for example, so there was 146 convictions. That's based on a 92% conviction rate from the health and safety executive made against construction companies, and fines over 15.7 million, with an average fine of about £107,000. It's quite interesting looking at this, and I just reflecting on Andy's point at the beginning, where we know that a lot of businesses closed down, particularly around sort of like large cities where construction work stopped. But if we look at the health and safety executive data, there is a number of construction businesses that continue to operate through the COVID lockdown. And interesting, just doing a very quick review of those, we've seen over 100 notices served from the 23rd of March to the 6th of June. That's the latest the date actually goes to. When we talk about notices served, these are improvement notices and prosecutions, or prohibition notices, should I say, which could potentially turn into prosecutions later on down the line. But it's interesting that there's so many, and if we look across the whole broader range of the notices served by the health and safety executive, the enforcing authority, there's a real mixture, and I think some lessons that we can learn post-COVID lockdown as we move forward. I'd also just point out from that two of those, only two of those related specifically to COVID-19 and spread prevention, and specifically relating to risk assessment. So we've seen the HSE continuing to issue improvement notices and prohibition notices through the lockdown period. But this is very reflective of an increase in intervention that we've seen. And some of the recent feedback that we'd heard from the enforcing authority is that they will continue to do so where there is imminent danger. Again, just reflecting on some of those notices that have been served. And I think, again, something quite telling is that we've seen an increase in the amount of notices served for things such as failing to ensure safety at working at height, for example, and very much procedural related types of notification. And where we think that that is driven from, as there's been a reduction in the amount of employees, perhaps there just haven't been the people available to be able to fulfill the procedures, hence why a big focus of the Health and Safety Executive at the moment is around redoing risk assessments post-lockdown to make sure that they're adequate and suitable and sufficient to protect employees from work. Another area that we've seen a big focus on is around alleged claims. This is a very broad area and it's very open to speculation at the moment. The government guidance is very much focused on risk assessment and, interestingly, talking to some of the insurance companies, particularly around workers' comp, employers' liability, public liability insurance, but also property, very much focused around using risk assessment as a way to evaluate the actual exposure moving forward, and that those risk assessments need to be updated on a regular basis. So we may have seen post-COVID, as we start to relax the rules of lockdown, that we start to unfurlough workers, bring back people to work, but we're not operating at full capacity. And actually reviewing the risk assessment, reviewing the health and safety, reviewing the processes that are followed may be different to what was originally in place. So I think it's an important message just to make sure that, you know, taking a step back, how have things changed operationally within the business, and are we still being able to maintain the safety of our employees, and also thinking about that from a subcontractor perspective as well. One of the things that we've had a lot of discussion around is social distancing. Construction industry, it's quite challenging. Often you've got people working in confined areas and small spaces where you can't do that. You're lessening the people, but are you then increasing the risk? So maintaining social distancing, again, a real challenge, but not something that we have specifically seen the Health and Safety Executive focus on. Also, the introduction of the 1 metre plus rule has caused some confusion. I don't think this is so much relevant to the construction industry, but there are elements of which that apply. For example, where you cannot maintain a 2 metre social distancing rule, then you can apply the 1 metre plus rule, but this requires the addition of personal protective equipment, for example, such as face masks. And again, does this come with other issues around wearing safety goggles? Does the mask then create issues around wearing other PPE that can fit incorrectly? If I can just jump onto my next slide, please, Rob. I wanted to just touch on some of the potential claims post COVID-19, and I think this is an important point to think of as we come out of lockdown and as we move forward and try to get back to business as usual, and really just share some of the insight that we've had, some of the concerns from insurers, some that we've seen within our own claims consulting services and claim servicing services about where they think that we're going to see some potential concerns moving forward. Lorna and Mark have already spoke about in depth around stress and anxiety. And I think this is a really important point. Now, as revenues have been depressed through COVID-19, then we are seeing some concerns around anxiety over job security, etc. Personal circumstances, people's own financial circumstances, for example, and also the return to work and actually the health and safety and how to do that and how to scale up in a safe way. Increase in skin conditions. So we have seen some quite worrying data around hand sanitizers. So this was really related to where other manufacturing companies were turning their manufacturing facilities into producing hand sanitizer during lockdown, but actually the lack of regulation around that has led to a less control over what was contained within that. And we have seen some hand sanitizers contain alcohol levels which are far above what the allowable levels were. The use of gloves and soap also causing some problems. The problem with dermatitis, it can be often a long tail issue, so can result in quite large claims costs moving down the line. increase in musculoskeletal disorders, and interesting, this point really does relay back to the Health and Safety Executive Notices of Improvement and Prohibition that they have issued, particularly around lone working and changes in process. I think for working from home, I think for the construction sector where office-based jobs are now have people working from home, I do think it's an important point about thinking about exacerbating pre-existing conditions. But I think in general within the workforce of construction, thinking about lone working, which needs to be implemented to maintain social distancing, becomes a real challenge whilst you're trying to maintain safety at the same time. And thus, therefore, it may be difficult to prove evidence of statutory obligation fulfilment. Contamination risks, again, I'm just focusing on contractors around this. So, you know, where subcontractors are being used, making sure that your own controls dovetail into those of your subcontractors and you're working collaboratively together to understand where those crossovers are so that you maintain a standard across the business. Just onto my final slide. So I really wanted to just pick up on that claim defensibility piece a little bit more and just talk about, we've been doing a lot of work with insurers, with the enforcing authorities to really understand what we can do to advise clients and how we can help them protect themselves against potential litigation or claims future on down the line. So controls implemented from risk assessment, they are implemented, recorded as being put in place, and records of that is maintained. I'm not going to read through all of these because I'm conscious we are short of time. Communication to staff is recorded, and understanding of the controls and why they are put in place. Very important, and making sure that that training, particularly in relation to social distancing, is actually recorded and records of that are kept as well. Reviewing the impact of COVID-19 control measures on other risks. So again, this comes back to the point where you may have lone workers. So thinking about the interaction of risk assessments and how they cross over. Using photographic evidence that's been put in place for things like social distancing. It's a good way to evidence and provide some defense from claims defensibility point of view. And thinking about systems to monitor changes in government and local COVID-19 guidance. There's been a lot of confusion over some of the information that's come out by Public Health England, Scotland, Wales, etc. But also globally, you know, we're misaligned with what's happening in Europe, for example, within the US. So how do we align ourselves to a common standard? Do we need a common standard, or should we be looking regionally? And how do we manage the risk from that? So that was really a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm now going to hand back to Andy. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Darren. So we come now to the Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to add them, ask them on the Q&A tab. We have a few questions come in already, so when everybody registered, we had a few questions that were able to be sent in while we register. So Lorna, I've got a couple of questions for you here. So firstly, first question is, Lorna, whose responsibility is it in the business to drive the mental health strategy?
Well, it's an interesting one because different businesses have different view sets on it, but being as this legislation under the Working Act 1974 on health and safety, I believe that the health and safety team, because they talk about proactive early intervention and preventative measures, that they should be running it. However, they do need to buddy up with HR as well, but they also need to get the buy-in of the leadership team as well, so they're able to demonstrate what they're doing in the business. But the most important thing is about driving it is also routinely monitoring and being able to produce reports every single month to show the demonstration of how it's working in the business too.
Okay, thanks for that. And your second question, which has come in, is if we don't have a culture that will support a mental health strategy, what can we do? Okay,
yeah, well, I've worked with lots of businesses and quite a couple of construction businesses, and that was actually their main concern. Again, we like to put a strategy in place first and say this is what we're going to do, but actually we need to treat this a little bit differently. It's a journey, and it's about starting which is the best way for your business. So what I found that has worked is actually sending out information about wanting to do the training courses first, especially the line managers course, and pilot it on them. So pilot on them, and it's been really successful because they've come back and they've learned so much more. And then they were able to then be able to go continue them with the training, and then eventually I trained all the leadership team and line managers and supervisors. Then they made it mandatory, and then it was easy enough then to get the mental health first aiders in, because people actually understood what it was all about, because there is a stigma surrounding mental health, and we are trying to break down those barriers, but the only way we can do that is by educating people. So my advice is to do the training first to start, and then just do baby steps and have a plan over the next 2 years, 3 years, and to be bringing it in.
Thanks for that, Lorna. I guess having buy-in from the likes of Prince William and Prince Harry and stuff, and openly talking about it in a conversation is really helping as well.
Yeah, and the football teams.
Sorry, Karen.
And the football teams and all sport personalities too. Yeah. Thank you.
So Mark, I've got a couple of questions for you here as well. So first one says, we want to develop a wellbeing strategy, but we're not sure how to demonstrate ROI. I'm assuming that's return on investment.
Yes. Yeah, good question. And I recognise from the poll that we did, there's a varying experience at the moment. So I think the absolute key to this is measurement from the outset. In order to really put in a successful strategy, which is effectively a plan of action for the next few years, isn't it? Is you've got to know where you're starting from. So we would typically recommend, and we do a lot of work with clients on this, to have a look at all the data sources relating to your health and wellbeing experience. So recognizing that the construction industry doesn't necessarily have large proportions of their employees covered by things like health insurance or protection insurance, we take a really strong interest in the occupational health activity, and in particular things around health screening and sort of the health surveillance and the health risk assessment side of things, because that is data that tends to be a lot richer around construction. So it really is about pulling together everything you've got in the first instance and understanding, what are my health risks, how prevalent are they, and what's the cost and frequency of these sorts of cases that are coming through. When you know that, you can then start to play through, as you invest in addressing those health risks, how you then track the measurement over time starts to demonstrate that return on investment as you see a more positive impact, and some of those costs reducing, and the frequency and severity of some of those claims and cases and absences reduce. So it all really comes back down to measurement.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. Second question to you is, we do lots of wellbeing initiatives, but we don't know if it is positively impacting employees' health. How do we better target what we're doing? Sure.
So there's a bit of overlap with the first answer there, I think, around measurement, but I think maybe an important point to stress here is about being targeted and tailored to your employees. So part of measuring isn't just numbers per se. It's about being able to understand what are your priorities. So if you know that it's mental health and musculoskeletal, then you need to really make sure you have a look at and almost audit what you currently provide and think, how strong am I in those areas in terms of targeting musculoskeletal and mental health? Have I got any gaps? Have I got people that maybe fall between the services that and the support that's available? And one of the other things that we particularly stress is about joining things up better. Providers and services are often delivered in isolation of each other. They're just a list of services. And really what you're looking to do is kind of find a more integrated and better joined up way of saying, when someone is struggling with mental health or with back pain or whatever it might be, how do I make it really easy and quick for them to access the right sort of support so they get the right treatment at the right time? And if you make early intervention a priority, you will typically find people get better quicker with less intervention. So it's more cost effective in that respect. So I think to sort of summarize an answer to that question, it is down to measurement, but it's also very much around making sure you are absolutely targeting the key health risks that you have in your population.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Darren, I've got a question here for you as well. have there been any obvious mistakes that you can share, such as your clients taking the wrong operational steps to address the COVID outbreak? And if so, how could that best be avoided?
That's quite a complex question, Andy, but it's a very good one. I think that the mistakes that people made were not necessarily their fault. I think that's the important thing. I think that when COVID hit, it hit quickly and it hit hard, and businesses had to adjust very, very quickly to be able to respond to the situation. And I think in doing so, some parts of, particularly around health and safety, had been missed. I think if we move forward from that point as we come out of lockdown, the mistakes that we're seeing is that as businesses try to recover as quickly as possible and push the economy back into, some movement back into the economy, what I don't think we're doing is spending enough time thinking about the risk exposure, and particularly the risk exposure where you have multiple sites, multiple contractors working, for example, on different sites. So you've got contractors, subcontractors, etc. I think we're not seeing the level of collaboration across both of them. I don't think that's quite a generalist view, but I think we only need to look back at the health and safety executive figures around the number of notices that have been enforced. I think there is evidence that failure to be able to proactively identify the risk through that assessment process has certainly given us some indication that that needs to be moved further up the agenda as a priority. And I would think that probably is the biggest mistake. And I think one of the other things that we're hearing from clients is that they think they're doing the right thing, but because there is so much information out there, it's difficult to get a handle on what is good practice. What should we be doing? Because it's constantly changing. And again, being able to evidence that to the board, to give the board confidence that they've fulfilled statutory obligations, I think is really important. So I would say both from a health and safety proactive perspective as coming out of lockdown, but also looking forward around claims defensibility and making sure that you've got that defensibility in place.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. And then another question coming for you. What advice could you give for construction companies to minimise the risk of COVID-19 spread?
So I think this is actually a really challenging one. I think it's a complex answer because each site will be unique and different. And I know we've seen a lot of things in the press around, should we be doing checking people's temperatures, etc., before they start work. I think it becomes very, very difficult for the construction sector. I think you've got so many moving parts. You've got specialists, in different parts of that construction and in different phases of the build. So it becomes quite challenging to manage all of those different people. But my advice is really do it from make it live, make it living, plan out what the future might look like and overlay what your approach is going to be on that planning process around getting back to work, and then thinking about the implications of safety from various different parties. I appreciate that I'm talking very much on a safety perspective, but the reason that I'm doing that is because I think that the post-lockdown issues that the construction industry face are going to be around claims. And I think that managing the costs around those is absolutely vital in reflection of some of the challenging market conditions that we've got at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Darren. There's a couple of questions come in via the Q&A tab as well. One here, I think, Darren, which kind of follows on from the last one that you were asked, which was, we see many larger sites of different companies requiring different COVID control measures. This is difficult for subcontractors who provide services to a range of companies and provides more work on measurement of grounds, etc. Do you think there should be a standard across the construction industry to create simplicity and easy understanding for requirements of all?
I absolutely think that there should. I think it's an incredibly complex and actually quite high risk just because of the locations and the even when you look outside of the UK and you look into Europe or you look into the US, etc., each of those countries are operating to different standards, whether it's a 1 meter rule, whether it's a 2 meter rule. And it becomes very, very difficult to try and align those, particularly where you are a global construction firm, and so you've got multiple projects across the globe. So I think that's the starting point. That's really, really difficult to do. I think even at a local level within the UK, I think that's challenging as well. Particularly with some subcontractors, they don't have the resources in place to be able to be proactive to create the RAMs, etc. So I think that there should be a standard. Interestingly, what we've seen in some other industry sectors, we've seen some industry leaders actually take charge in that. So one of them I can think of has actually produced a standard. It's actually for events company, and one of the leading events, global leading events providers, has produced a standard on safe running of events post COVID-19, which they're making freely available to all other events companies. And it would be great to see the construction sector do something similar around that, at least providing some minimum standards of guidance. So I absolutely think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I agree, Darren. And like you say, getting some of the construction bodies involved in that, in setting up a standard that everyone can comply with.
Yeah.
Lorna, I've had a question coming for you. Do you see a change of attitude and approach to mental health between pre and post COVID by various companies?
I absolutely do. As you can imagine, I've been really, really busy, which is great for me, because people are really now open to the initiatives and they can really see the value of being able to put training in place. We've had to make a few adjustments by being able to doing it online, made short online 30-minute workshops to be able to distribute to lots of businesses, because before it used to be 1 in 4 people would be affected by a mental health condition within 12 months. So 25% of your workforce, but since lockdown, there's actually been an increase of 37% on top of that. So we're looking at over 62% of people who are now affected by a mental health illness or symptoms. And as you can imagine, anxiety is through the roof. We've been able to do lots of work with lots of businesses and just giving them tips on how to make sure that they keep the routine in place, make sure managers are in contact as much as they can with all of their workforce, and just to be able to keep an eye on them, because we still have a duty of care when people are at home too, to be able to look after them. But it's a little bit more challenging. But again, so they're asking, how can we pick up these signs? So just make sure that you're in touch with them. But I've definitely seen the landscape change in terms of businesses actually coming to me and wanting to know what they can do for their employees. And let's not forget, it just doesn't affect their employees. People are working at home with their families, and they may be supporting a family member who might have just started with anxiety, and they don't actually know what to do. So again, it's having to support them and actually knowing what's out there, what can support them as well. And I would hopefully see a spike in employment assisted programs being used over the last few months. If we don't, then we've got some issues there. But I really do think that a lot of people would be using them a lot more and to have in hand. But yes, definitely, and I think it will be the way forward now too.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Lorna. So now, Rob, we have a couple of polls coming up. We've just, whilst we've got our audience members here, we have a couple of polls just to do with webinar program and how much content you guys would like to see. So if we could just have this up for 30 seconds. Obviously, as we said, we're aware there are a lot of webinars available at the moment. How often would you guys like to see invites to various different webinars? Okay, that's good. Monthly. And then the second part of that poll is to do with content. What is of most interest to you guys? I think you can click more than one of these. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. If we close that poll down, and then if we can just pop, we've got no more questions coming in, so if you can just pop onto the last slide, please, Rob. So thank you again to our panel, and again thank you guys for taking time out of your day to join us. We will be sending out a copy of today's presentation along with the recording of this webinar to everybody that registered and attended. Please do not hesitate to reach out to your Marsh representative if you've got any questions or concerns that you have, or again any member of the panel. For more information and resources, again please feel free to visit our COVID-19 resource on marsh.com/UK. And you'll find all of our thought leadership offerings and solutions and advice. And so all that remains is just to say thank you very much for your time.